Why isn't Barbie called an action figure? A friend of mine asked me that question once, and it stuck with me. In the TV ads of my childhood, Barbie and Ken were dolls, but G.I. Joe was an action figure. My friend asked me this question, and we discussed it a bit, and we decided that the difference was if you were an action figure, your elbows could bend. The action figures were called that because they had articulated joints. But we all know the real reason is that dolls were for girls. And G.I. Joe was a manly sort of toy for boys. Hence, it was an action figure. Now, the original G.I. Joe in 1964, the G.I. Joe action figure this is, was, an average-looking Joe. He came with a cloth uniform and a cloth cap, boots, and a gun. The latest G.I. Joe on the market is very muscle-bound and heavily covered with body armor so that no flesh is visible. Even his face is completely enclosed in a high-tech helmet. The description on the product reads, G.I. Joe is a highly skilled, on-demand special operations force of men and women from around the globe, tasked with defending the world from Cobra, a ruthless criminal organization bent on total domination. This G.I. Joe figure contains 12 character-inspired accessory pieces, including helmet, sword, scabbard, and multiple weapon accessories. The modern G.I. Joe is less man than machine, really. No ordinary human, but an invincible warrior armed to the teeth with powerful weapons. The modern G.I. Joe is a lot less David and a lot more Goliath. In the story that Bruce read so marvelously well, there is a standoff between the Philistines and the Israelites. They are on opposite hills with an open valley between. Neither army wants to go down in the valley because then it will be a literal uphill battle for them. And so the Philistines propose instead single combat of champions, a way of resolving conflicts with violence but less violence. So they send out their champion. Huge and heavily armored, Goliath cuts a terrifying figure. He is a highly skilled, on-demand special operations force. David, young shepherd and musician, volunteers to do battle with him. Saul offers him armor, but it's too heavy and cumbersome for David. So David will rely on his swing, which, by the way, was a bona fide weapon. It wasn't like a slingshot. It was like a sling. But no armor. Just faith. Now, I want you to imagine, if you will, action figures of David and Goliath. The David figure, he's an average Joe. The Bible tells us that David was very handsome, but he was otherwise not very physically imposing. He was not as tall as his brothers, certainly not as tall as King Saul, and nowhere near as tall as Goliath, who, if you convert the ancient units, was about 6'9". David comes with these accessories. The David action figure comes with these accessories: a sling and 5 little stones, scaled down, to action figure size. Now, the Goliath action figure is much bigger than the David action figure. The Goliath accessories include breastplate, shield, helmet, spear, and sword. Now ask yourself, which action figure would sell better in today's market? We are no longer interested in heroes. We want superheroes. Because who needs faith when you are invincible? Well, we opened this morning, our first reading was from the letter of the Ephesians, and it describes the disciples' calling, the way of Jesus, using the metaphor of a suit of armor. It is an ironic metaphor. It should challenge our thinking about the relationship between right and might. Because what sort of battle really would it be if you had one army equipped with literal shields and swords, and the other is armed with faith and honesty? The interesting thing is, if you go into Google or whatever your search engine is, and you Google the phrase armor of God, you will get all sorts of little Christian memes and teaching aids about this passage from Ephesians. Every single one of them has a picture of a heavily armored soldier with like a little arrow that says belt of truth, right? Shoes of the gospel. But they do not look like Jesus or like David, for that matter. They do look an awful lot like Goliath. But the armor of God is not an arsenal or a set of superhero accessories. The belt of truth is not like Wonder Woman's lasso of truth. If any of you remember that had like the power to force her enemies to confess the truth, although we could have used one of those at the debate earlier this week. No, the belt of truth is just being honest. It makes us more vulnerable, not less. If we picture a person clothed in the armor of God but no other armor, they wouldn't look like Goliath. They would look like David, only without the sling. Imagine an action figure of Jesus. There's a small detail at the very end of that story that I just want to lift up. At the very end of the story, it tells us that David keeps Goliath's armor and sword. He's just a young boy now, but one day he will grow into it. The day will come when David will no longer be the underdog, but the king, the one in the position of power, and eventually the day will come when he begins to abuse that power. But that is in the future. Today, David faces the giant, unencumbered by armor. Today, he is no superhero, merely a mortal, as are we all underneath the armor. We started off singing This Little Light of Mine, I'm Gonna Let It Shine. Got to take the armor off for anyone to see it.